Hey guys, just getting stuff set up, and then we're gonna kick off. Just finishing this up real quick. Had a lot of kind of issues this morning, and other stuff to do, and then had a power issue just as I was about to start the stream. So this is probably gonna be a pretty short stream. Gonna try to get through it probably pretty quickly, just in case. Apparently, I have another small power outage. So always fun. Here. So hopefully your guys' weekend is going a little bit better than mine is at this point. Man, busy, got stuff going on. But not necessarily bad, just a lot. Let's go ahead and here, almost ready. Alright, this and here. Alright. Okay, I think we should be good to go there. Alright, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of my hex stocking rules in particular, and sort of a little bit about hex crawls in general, and then just kind of go through it. Like I said, it's going to be, I think it's going to be a relatively straightforward, hopefully a pretty short stream. I don't want to tarry too long, or I think I probably will lose the stream at some point, so we're just going to try to plow through it. If you guys have any questions, of course, drop them in the comments below, and I'll address them as I can. So one of the things we want to talk about first is, I think there were a lot of people who are newer DMs that are especially kind of interested in doing hex crawls and in that sort of that mode of play, that sort of style of playing, rather than the sort of big adventure, hardbound book, like very plot-centric, very plot-driven kind of D&D, which is sort of how people get in. But I think it's really hard. I feel like a lot of, especially newer dungeon masters, kind of stumble there because it's an extremely player-driven sort of mode of play that can make it sort of like more difficult to sort of find the right mixture between sort of prepping and improvising when you're a DM, because you kind of go from, if you go from sort of the other aspect, the very plot-centric aspect, you kind of have that, it sometimes gets mislabeled as sort of a railroad, but you're like, okay, there's a through line, there's like a start to the adventure and an end to the adventure that we're trying to get to. So that part's pretty straightforward, and it gives you sort of like every step along that path of what needs to happen to sort of get to that end. Whereas you do something that's like a hex crawl, and that's very much of a freeform sandbox style of game, where it's more about you can go anywhere and do anything, and you're going to uncover this world, and I'm probably, as the dungeon master, going to uncover a lot of the world with you, because one of the things that's really hard to do is prep an entire world like that, especially when it's player-driven mode of play, so you don't necessarily know where they're going to go at any time. I mean, if you're doing the smart things you do as a dungeon master, at the end of each session you ask them what they're going to do in the next session, and that gives you sort of direction for your prep. But there is always the thing is, if that doesn't take long, or they get there and or something else comes up along the way and they need to deviate and take care of something else, and then you're like, okay, well, I can't prep everything for all situations at all times, right? We know that doesn't work as a dungeon master. So what is sort of the solution to that sort of pain problem for people who want to maybe get started with hex crawls but are kind of unsure about how difficult it's going to be, like maybe they don't feel comfortable, and you don't feel comfortable and you're improvising, or you don't understand sort of the prep instance of it. So I thought I'd go over some of the sort of my personal sort of hex stocking things and kind of talk about it, because I think what's helpful for me in this mode of play is having the stocking table, having those sort of supporting role tables and descriptions that kind of they do a lot to sort of help you make something relatively unique quickly as you're kind of going through it. And no matter if you're sort of like prepping in an immediate area, or you're sort of like improvising sort of a longer term exploration, maybe overlaying kind of crawl at the table, it's going to work for either one of those situations. You don't have to worry about it not working or that it's only good for like a local area thing and not good for sort of like a long journey if you want to kind of focus on doing a journey sort of style game where you guys are trying to go from one starting point to a second starting point that's like continent away or something like that. It's, you know, the classic sort of Lord of the Rings, like big walking journey kind of thing, epic journey. It's perfectly capable of sort of doing that stuff too, like Gulliver's Travels kind of thing. Either of those would work really well with it. So there's going to basically, my hex stocking table provides sort of like 20 basic themes of points of interest that the party can kind of stumble across when they're exploring the lands, around sort of like their base of operations, that sort of hub and spoke sort of thing. So why don't we go ahead and jump in. I'm going to pull the sort of process up and we can kind of look at it together. And then we'll kind of go through each one, and then I think at the end, I'll do a little like sort of basic hub and spoke hex crawl sandbox starter to kind of show you how quickly you can kind of throw one of these up and then kind of figure out where you're going to go from there. So let's go ahead and swap that over. Alright. There we go. So these are sort of my hex stocking rules. So the idea is that you enter a new hex, there's a 1d20 chance of stumbling across a point of interest, and the sort of rate of that is dependent on whether something comes up. Depends on what sort of situation that you're in. If you're in the sort of settled marches or wilds, but with the d20 up here. So we can kind of go ahead, I think, and just showcase that. Let me pull up one of these guys. Pull up a little hex email. I'm gonna swap this, and I'm gonna reset this. We're gonna make this. Let's go like 15 by 50. That should be more than enough room. Go ahead and set that size. There we go. So you got plenty of room to sort of play in here. So if we want to set a starter point of, let's say we're starting like here-ish. Oop. I shouldn't have done that. The things I always forget to do is that you have to take adaptive size off, or else it screws with it while you're trying to make the map, and I don't like the way that works. Alright, so let's say that's like our starter point. So if we were moving from sort of this hex right here, and we're gonna move, let's go into like this neighboring hex, and we'd be like, okay, you're going in there, roll a d20 to see if you stumble across anything. And let's say that we're in sort of like a settled area. Let's say that this where we're starting from is actually like a little village or something. Let me grab my little village symbol and we'll drop it in. So there's a little village there, and so we know that we're in sort of a settled place. That means it's on a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 on that d20 roll. We're gonna stumble across something. Nope, don't. As far as we know, it's clear. Now, that doesn't mean that this hex is confirmed sort of empty. All it means is that this one is confirmed empty. It just means that we didn't find it. So, that's if you're stumbling across, like, in your travels, and you just happen to walk across that point of interest. So, not always do you do that, because each of these hexes is quite large, so it is feasible that you would walk past it and not see it within this hex, if you were just traveling in that direction. So that's sort of the first step. So we moved into the next one. There's a chance of stumbling across the point of interest. We didn't do that. Since we didn't find one, we can spend time to confirm whether the hex or area has a point of interest or not. And that's a d6 roll. And that takes like a movement in the hex crawl. So instead of the sort of time movement that would take you to move to a different hex, you instead focus on this hex. And then there's confirmed that you'll know whether there is a point of interest or not, if you're going to spend the time to search. And so this time we just roll with a d6. So like I said, in the settled areas 1 through 5, there's going to be some sort of point of interest. On a 6, there's not anything. Alright, so there is. So we go, okay. So we did that situation. We're in the settled areas. Yes, we determined the area's point of interest, which is sort of like an optional 1d6 theme. So we could roll our theme if we wanted to. Might as well, because I have everything up here. The note's up here, but I'll share it. 3, which is, we're in settled. So artificial. Cool. Oh, so it's something to do with what did I roll? 18? Something to do with undead. So an undead something. That's sort of our theming, our flavor that we kind of put on the point of interest. And then we rolled a on the lower side, so we actually get to roll a d12 instead of a d20 on that our point of interest chart. And we'll talk about why that is in just a second. So we rolled a 7. Alright, there is some sort of meeting place. Let's just go right here. It is sort of like fairgrounds, like a sort of a religious sort of area where they do sort of like feasts and things like that, and some maypole dances, those sorts of things. Any sort of like county fair things would be held in a place like this. So it's a meeting place, but it's got some sort of undead tint to it. So we could change it around and make it be like a meeting place. It could be a haunted meeting place. It might be fun, like a haunted fairground. Sure. So then we just take our little symbol down here, and we'll say for something that's sort of like a meeting place, let's go with this little star. And if I really wanted to, I'd come in here in the hex, and then I would hit that. So that way I can see it. It could be right here. I can give it a little label if I wanted to, and I can see. So it's a haunted fairground. And now we know. So that's sort of the absolute basic premise. That's sort of how it works. So we can talk a little bit about it. So I said that there is sort of the optional theme, and then the situation, right? It's a little bit more complex. We can go ahead, we can make those tables really quick if we want to, just to kind of show you guys what they look like. I'm not gonna give you I don't know if I want to give you guys full tables. I definitely have them saved in a different area, but I'm not sure I'm just going to import that in right now or take the time to type it out. But I should do that one aspect of it. Okay, so let's do settled. We'll have our 1d6 marches and our 1d6 for wilds. And this is for like our POI chance, point of interest chance. Again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop them in, and I will address them, take a look at them as I'm able to, and talk about them a little bit, respond to them. Alright, so on a 1, 2, a 3, yeah, I'll just do it this way. 1 through 3, and then that's 4 through 5, and then 6. So if you roll a 1 through 3, you roll a 1d12. We'll talk, like I said, we'll talk about that in a second. 4 through 5, 1d20 on the chart, on the POI stocking table, and on 6, none. Confirm that there's not a point of interest. So what this shows you is that sort of like in the settled, if you're in those sort of like settled areas and you're around sort of like villages and cities and things like that, there's likely that you're going to run into some sort of point of interest pretty much in any direction you go. Like there's a lot more sort of like civilization buildup. There's a lot more things to sort of uncover. As you get into the marches, that becomes sort of like a 50% chance. So 1 through 3, you have a you roll a 1d20. And then on a 4 through 6, confirmed, empty, there's nothing there. 50% chance as you get closer to sort of like the frontiers, to the edges of civilization, it's more likely that you're going to actually be able to see that. That you're going to see that sort of civilization, all these sort of different points of interest start to thin out, and then that happens even more once you get into the wilds. In the wilds, there's only a 1 in 6 chance, so it's really only on a 1 that you roll a 1d20. So once you get into the wilds, most of the time you're not going to come across anything. Which, depending on the way you play and the way you're sort of implementing a hex crawl, you're usually not going to drop some of these sort of a hub and spoke campaign in the middle of the wilds for the most part. It would be interesting. You could start definitely a campaign that has like the last village at like the end of the world kind of thing, where it's surrounded by wilds, or maybe it's a post-apocalyptic kind of thing. And so, but the thought is that if you do that, most of the time when you're traveling around, you're not going to be running into points of interest. You're not going to be finding dungeons to delve and things like that. So it's a different sort of style of game if you want to do something like the Wilds, where your focus may be a little bit more on being able to stay supplied and stay geared up and dealing with more sort of natural hazards and the consequences of things, where just sort of like getting from point A to point B is really the struggle. And not necessarily stumbling over a dungeon every, hour of travel or whatever it is. But yeah, this is sort of the setup. Very, very simple. Like I said, it gets I have more sort of complicated tables, but this was the absolute basics of just how to do it, how to throw it out real fast and get it done. So, hopefully that's all clear to you guys. Hopefully there's not a lot of questions about it. I think it's a pretty easy thing to sort of rock. It doesn't take too much of the old noggin power to figure it out. So let's jump down to the D12 D20 sort of POI stocking table. So this is sort of why this table is the way that it is. We talked about sometimes you roll the D12, sometimes you roll the D20. So the table itself is weighted, so things that show up 1 through 12 are more like humanoid civilized sort of things. So that's why when you're in that sort of settled area, you're more likely to have a volume of points of interest to visit, but also the types of points of interest that are going to come up more often are these same sort of basic 12 that are very sort of makes you feel like you're in the center of a civilization and not sort of further out on the frontiers. So that gives you sort of like these 12 that you're going to be looking at in that area. So that's settlements, a holding with a minor settlement that's like a manor house or a keep or a castle, a religious site with a settlement, a travel haven with a settlement that's like an inn, roadside inn, things like that. A crossing like a bridge or a ferry in a minor settlement, a level appropriate monster lair, because monsters can also, in the world of D&D, right, we're just talking about creatures, so that can include plenty of humanoids, so these could be like warlords, bandits, organized crime outfits, thieves guilds, and then all your standard sort of monsters as well. So a lot of those as well. So you can have many of those, but it gives you a lot of flexibility and shows that like there are these sort of like pockets of power within the civilized area that you're kind of going through, which is very fun. So we have our level appropriate monster layer. So it basically, as long as it stays within that tier, that if you're doing that bottom tier of adventure where your levels 1 through 4, that it is going to be sort of a big bad BBEG for that monster layer. Whoever's in charge of that monster layer, whatever's sort of like the iconic creature or monster of it, is going to fall within that range still. So that way it's a relatively appropriate challenge. Now it could be, it's a CR 4 or 5 bad monster like in charge, like a boss monster, and maybe you have level 1 adventurers who rock up on it. In my games, right, this is my stocking table, so in my games I'm like just letting you know, this thing is really powerful and is sort of like the big known like bad thing that's in this area. So you can determine whether you think that you have enough adventuring under your belt to handle that or not. Which is a very fancy way of saying, yeah, this will probably kill you if you go in this dungeon, so maybe don't do that. Maybe you come back to this point of interest. Maybe you do some other stuff first. Do some other adventuring, get some levels up, complete some missions, have some other wild adventures, and then circle back here and then maybe take this on when it's a little bit more appropriate for you. After that is the meeting place. That's number 7. We already talked about that was the first little example we did with the fairgrounds that are haunted. The isolated homestead, that's some sort of like hermit or somebody who's living out by themselves. So a former adventurer, a neutral monster, an outcast, or an outlaws. So if you want to do like a Robin Hood thing, that could also be an isolated homestead if you wanted to. If you wanted to do something like that. An informative point of interest, so that's some sort of, it gives you information, like a boundary marker, a messenger station, petroglyphs, things like that, like the pieces of the sort of like large natural art, that way, like pictographs and things like that. Warning POIs are things that give you a rumor of a nearby POI to watch out for. It's basically telling you, it gives you information about other potentially adventurous things or hazardous things sort of in the area. It could be like a gibbet, a dread omen, watchtower, hangman's tree. It could be all sorts of fun stuff. It could be some sort of like spike of fey crystal that's just jutting out of the ground or something like that. It kind of gives you an idea of something else nearby that might be a danger, or let you know of something like that. 11 is natural resource location. That can be anything from like a forage spot of like blackberry bushes, all the way to like a full-on plantation that's sort of out in the field. So again, that's sort of the level we're working with, as far as sort of how developed that natural resource location. It could be like a full like strip mine operation, or it could be, you know, it's a place where you go to. It's got maple trees in it, and you to collect maple syrup and sap and things like that. So it kind of depends on you and how you're feeling about like what makes sense for the area as to what sort of natural resource it should be, as well as sort of like how developed it needs to be. And then number 12 is construction. I like this one a lot because it's not one that I see on a lot of other people's sort of like tables or even in other games, is that it allows you to basically, if you roll this 12, you're like, oh, I rolled construction. Okay, great. And then you roll a d10. Okay, 2. Alright, so they are in the middle of constructing a new manor house. Somebody's making a new manor house or keep or something like that. And so you come across it, and I really like that sort of injection into the game of both number 12 and what we're about to talk about in just a second, number 13. We're going to go through 13 through 20, which are ruins. So it gives you, both of these give you the ability to sort of showcase points of interest and locations and show the world as sometimes where it's being built up or sometimes it's sort of falling apart and eroding. So you can kind of get both of those at the same time here, which is really fun. You will notice that you do not construct natural resource locations. I had to leave one out. That one seemed like the one that was most important to me because it's, at its core, can also just be a natural thing. So, yeah, unfortunately that one I don't, it kind of gets stuck out in the rain as far as being a construction. But there are, I don't know, it's hard for me because I also feel like the way natural resources are exploited is that's a very sort of organic, natural process that goes from, hey, finding silkworms and being able to like get their silkworms and silk in the wild, all the way up to running like a gigantic sort of silkworm farm. And that seems like a more sort of natural progression rather than a artificial construction and then deconstruction of ruins. So, yeah. That's my take on it anyways. That's why I chose it to leave that one out. But I had to leave one out regardless. And then we get to number 13. So these are the ones that show up in the marches. Very common. Now these, when you start rolling the d20, everything's weighted equally. So you don't have that d12 weighting towards like more civilized, settled lands kind of thing. So these can show up just as commonly as the 1 through 12 can show up. 13, ruin, same thing. You roll that, this time you roll a d12. Because you can technically have ruins of a construction of a different site, which is fun. Okay, I rolled a 12, which is exactly what happened. So this is a ruins of a construction site, and what were they building? Oh, that's a settlement. So you see this sort of, you could walk in and be like, oh, you can see that this was a settlement that was started to being built. Like there's like temporary tents up, and there's like awnings over a bunch of like lumber and other sort of building supplies and things like that. But it seems like these things have been left out in the elements, and this place has been abandoned. It's sort of like the barest skeleton of a ghost town that you kind of walk into. It kind of gives you this cool kind of flavor to add onto it. And then let's say we wanted to add a little theme onto it, we could do that as well. So I rolled a d6. Let's say this was in the marches. So that would be a 5. So that would be weird. So something weird attached to it. Something weird of 15, which is Fey. Okay, so so you walk into this construction of this village, and that's been ruined, and you might decide, okay, it's either a Fey village, so these are sort of like weird Fey homes that are in sort of strange construction, like maybe Hobbit hole kind of things that are in construction but have fallen apart. Or you can be like, oh, it seems like the cause of this ruination was Fey. So you can interpret it however you want. So these tables are really useful for being sort of like jumping off points. Like we're going to give you like a handful of ideas to sort of like spark your imagination, and then you mash those together in a pot and cook up a stew that is this point of interest that you then sort of vomit out to it. Hey, how's it going? Hope you're having a good day. So yeah, I mean that's sort of my take on these stocking tables. Like that's what I'm kind of looking for out of them. So it just gives me a very easy way to very quickly make these kind of unique-ish points of interest that I don't really have to do a lot of prep beforehand. Like, right, we just did the ruins of a construction of a village, and you know there's some sort of Fey tinge to that. So whether that is the ruination of it, let's say it's the ruination of it. Like there was something here, and then maybe there's no bodies. Maybe we find like other sort of, maybe it's infested with sort of Fey creatures, maybe left over like dryads or pixies or something like that. Some other small ones. Maybe that's covered in blights and who knows, all sorts of others. Though I think blights are technically plant creatures, not Fey creatures. But you could twist that and say they were Fey creatures. I think that's acceptable. Reskinning of that monster, twig blights and things like that, needle blights. Yeah, I think those would work. So right, it gives you a lot of options to kind of toss in there and kind of make things different. So you could get that same prompt and make, you know, a handful of particularly different points of interest of that very flavors of that very specific outcome of a point of interest. So it just kind of gives you a bunch of ideas to kind of go with. So yeah, that's sort of what I wanted to share. This is basically how I do hex crawl stocking hexes for a game. And I think really the last thing to kind of really talk about is our hub and spoke. So I wanted to do a sort of like hub and spoke hex crawl starter map, just to kind of show you guys what it looks like, how easy it is to kind of set up and play with, and kind of give you an idea of how to do this yourself, and maybe throw some things out there to try to smooth that transfer of experience in, especially for newer dungeon masters, from sort of those that very plot heavy, straightforward, very thin, not thin, straight as narrow sort of narrative play style that kind of comes with the big adventure books that kind of come out, whether that's for D&D or Pathfinder or whatever your game of choice is. But you know, the big hefty tomes like, that are very long adventures, and break away from these very heavy narrative adventures and try to do something that's a very different sort of mode of play, that's very sort of player and character driven, so they kind of need to make their own goals and figure out what they want to do sort of in the area, and then give you the ability to sort of like explore that space with them. So it's a very different sort of mode of play, and so I think this will be helpful to kind of smooth you guys into that transition if you're trying to, you know, figure that out. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit. I'll just show you a real brief example of sort of a hub and spoke hex crawl. Like this is like a starter map. I've done this for many campaigns. I have a full sheet that just helps me just make a campaign start in like 15 minutes. Very easy. And this is part of those rules. So let's do this. So we're gonna do our hub and spoke. Oop, that's not the right one. There we go. So let's get these guys gone. And then let me grab this guy. Oop. And he's gone. And we'll move this one. And now you're gone. And I'm gonna move that. And we'll just move this real quick. So the first thing that I like to do when I'm setting up one of these sort of like basic, and move this over here. There we go. When I want to set up one of these super sort of basic starter maps, I just figure out, okay, what is the sort of the primary biome that we want to start the campaign sort of off in. Be like, okay, what's a good light climate? Maybe something I haven't done in a while. I go, well, let's see. Let's think about me personally. It's like, all right, we're playing in a very jungle heavy one, and another very heavy forest one. So, and then I'm also doing a little ice thing, so I don't want to do something too cold. So let's do like hills. I like that. Let's just some very basic hills. Let's start that off, And then if I'm feeling froggy, I might do the ones around it, the immediate hexes sort of around it. But okay, we're gonna start in sort of like this highlands, sort of rolling hills area. That's gonna be sort of the base of operations for us. So that's our start. So we've got our primary biome, and sort of our primary area. Are we playing in like a settled area in marshes or the wilds? You know, I don't think I've got anything that's kind of going on in the middle of like a heavy civilization right now. Everything's pretty much on the kind of the frontiers for the most part. So let's do like settled. So I'm just gonna write a little note for myself down here. Just be like settled. So now I know it. So that just affects, you know, our point of interest stocking. And that would be more for play. We don't really necessarily need it right off the bat. And it's a little helpful, but it's more for once you get started, because you're gonna need to make those decisions real quick once you hit the table and you're playing. We need our sort of central safe haven location. We've got that already. Just picked that out. And oh, we need to determine what type it is though. So let's roll like a. Let's say a D12. Let's see what it comes up with. Now I'll maybe change my mind. Okay, 2, which is, let's say, is it a keep? I'll just ask myself for an oracle question. It is a keep. Okay, so it is a keep and a sort of manor house. Great. So let's go ahead. I'm going to put a little stamp down here. I'm going to use sort of the. Which icon do I want to use? Let's use a shield. That's usually what I use for these. Right. And that tells us that, hey, there's a keep here. And then there's sort of a minor settlement. I'll just put that we'll put that in the secret notes, because if you use the secret notes in HexTML, it does not show up, which is nice, but you can always reference it. So I'm just going to put down here that there is a minor settlement. How many people live here? It's technically a D50, but I'll do a D100. Alright, 45. No problem. Alright, minor settlement with a population of about 45 people. So, you know, it's got some supporting staff and houses and sort of like their sort of private tenants, things like that. So we know that we're working in sort of like the smallest area of the map. That's the sort of scale I decided to do for the map. So this is probably a very this could be like a knight probably. It's probably going to be like their kind of demeanor. Maybe a very small end, sort of like baron or baronet, but probably a knight's keep at this point. So I'm just going to put that in here. This Knight's keep. Since we don't have a name for that knight, you know, if I was making this for an actual thing, I'd make a name for the knight and maybe think about like what their heraldry is real quick, and sort of maybe who their liege lord is, and maybe kind of for campaign I'd be like, okay, what's the important thing? What's the important problem they're dealing with at the time? Because they're sort of the lord of this immediate area. So what are they sort of? What's on their docket? Because that's a good way to figure out what we're going to do for adventuring. So we got our central sort of safe location, then we're going to make some spoke adventure sites. I do this basically by just going in every direction around and just roll a 12. We said this was a settled area, so let's say 3, okay, and another 12. So this first 12 is how many hexes away it is, and it's 2, okay. So it's another holding. Ah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So all the way up here at the top, we're actually going to have another holding. Let's get our stamp. Let's see. Is this being like another oracle question? Is this their liege lord? Yes. Okay. So we'll just put up here that this is sort of like the Baron's castle. Okay, so that's sort of their liege lord, who was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. away, and so my scale at this lowest level is leagues. Of course, I have another video where we talk about all of this, so if you're looking for more of the sort of world building mapping stuff, go check out those other videos, as well as the blog, reddragonfiend.com. We have a whole world building process series where I talk about the hexes and the sizes that I choose and why they are that way. But these are I measure these lowest level hexes by about a league, which is 2 nautical miles, which is about 2.3 statute miles, which is 3.5 or so kilometers, something like that. So it's a good. I like it because it's first a very easy breakdown as far as numbers for counting hexes and distance, but also it means that every hex takes about an hour of walking to get through, which is really nice. When you're thinking about sort of like how much time is expended by moving, so I like measuring that in hours, this lowest scale instead. But I have an entirely different way of doing hex crawling, which has its own video where I talk about how I measure, like, on how far you get in a day traveling and things like that. Alright, but that was the first thing. So let's see what's sort of like out east of our Knight's Keep where we're starting out. So it's going to be, how far away is it? Also 6. And is it a 6? So what is number 6 for us? So number 6. I didn't actually roll. I didn't actually roll to see if it was a d20 or not. It's a d12. Okay, so everything's good. Everything's kosher. We don't have to worry about level appropriate monster lair. Fantastic. All right, good. So we jump in here, and then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We know that over here there is a monster lair. We don't know what that is, but we're gonna say, or just saying monster lair right now. I'm trying to think of what would be a good sort of low-level monster lair that could be over there. What's a good sort of like low-level? Sure, I mean, right, there's always the Goblin Cave. Well, let's go with Goblin Cave. It's nice and easy. It's classic for a reason. Goblin Cave. Boom. Done. Get out of here. There you go. So we got our Knight's Keep, we got our Goblin Cave, we got our Baron's Castle. What's next? To our southeast. Ooh, 9 hexes away. Probably gonna have to move the map a little bit. Alright, another d12 roll. So 3 is gonna be some sort of religious site. That's going to be 9 away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Need one more down there. 9, 10. 11, 12. Why not? Alright, so we did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Alright, and where did we say this was? Oh, religious location. Let's get our little, I like the temple. Boop. Alright. And I said temple, so let's just say temple. And so the temple would also have, as well with the Baron's Castle, both of those will have also their own sort of minor settlements that kind of come with them. So there are places where you can resupply and buy things, hire people to work for you if you want to do those. So there are all these little communities. So you have some little communities right now that are, 3 of those communities are relatively close together, so there's probably quite a bit of travel. So it's not quite probably a day trip from Knight's Keep and Baron's Castle, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Takes about 6 hours on the road. So really can't make it there and make it back. And then this is even further, right? This is 9 hours. So this is the temple's like a full day walk from the Knight's Keep. But already you can start to see sort of how these locations are all sort of in tie with each other. And then obviously one of the things is probably a big headache for our knight and their Knight's Keep right now is dealing with the Goblin Cave to the east. But let's deal with what's just sort of the southwest here. How far away is it? It's 4 hexes away. And that's a d20 roll. And that's 4, which is another monster lair. So we got ourselves another monster lair. 4 away. 2, 3, 4. Okay, perfect. And then we're gonna grab this. We're gonna grab our new little monster lair. Boom. Grab this guy. What's another good low level? We could always do kobolds, but let's not do kobolds. Let's do something else. I've been fighting a lot of gnolls lately. Let's go humanoids. Let's go that, like, this is a sort of like a... It's like a little smuggler's redoubt. It's kind of like a little fortification that they've taken over. It's sort of like a bandit kind of camp, smuggler's redoubt. So obviously that's another thing that our knight is going to be worried about in our keep. So we've already got potentially two adventures kind of going off right there. Then let's go to our straight west from us. 10 leagues away. And it's going to be... Oh, nothing. There's actually nothing in that direction. Actually, if I'm usually doing this sort of hub and spoke thing, there's definitely going to be something. So let's re-roll that. I'm just trying to figure out whether I'm rolling a d12 or a d20. A d12. Right, what is 8? An isolated homestead. Perfect. So 10 hexes away. Isolated homestead. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. 9, 10, 11, 12. There we go. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 9, 10. And we've got an isolated homestead, which I use this little house icon for. Makes it easy. There we go. Nice hospitality here. Boop. We can also determine like what kind of creature that is. So we have our, I can roll my d6 and then a d20. 2, we said we are in the settled area, so some sort of artificial, which is some sort of person, or man-made. And this time it is an ooze, so that's interesting. And of course, if you don't like the results, you can always just like overwrite them, roll again, whatever you want. But I like it. I'm gonna stick with ooze. There's some sort of like a neutral, intelligent ooze. So there's just an ooze that hangs out here that people know about, but is not monstrous, but is a monster. So it kind of hangs out. I want to make it intelligent so that way you can kind of talk to it, maybe with like telepathy or something like that. Does some brain speak, and maybe it chewed up and ate it mind flare or something, and it's got some of that psychic energy now, and it can use that sort of psychic energy to communicate. And maybe I'll just give it psychic powers too. I don't know. If you piss it off, maybe it'll throw you across the room with its telekinesis. So. Already weird characters, already fun stuff to just kind of throw in here. It just takes a few minutes to kind of put this together. Definitely a lot slower when I'm talking through the process though. But sitting down and just doing it, like I said, it takes me more fleshed out than this when I do my sort of like 15-minute campaign start. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes. Usually faster than 15 if I know what I'm doing. Which is sometimes. I sometimes know what I'm doing. And for the northwest, okay, 1 league away. 2, okay, so it's gonna be d12. 1, okay, so there's a little village, there's a little settlement up here. It is right here. I'm gonna drop down our little village right here. So this is actually the larger village, so this is very interesting. So if I was doing this, and I was setting up my own campaign, what I might do is I might actually come back in here and I might swap this Knight's Keep and Baron's Castle. So this would be sort of like the central liege lord, and then there's going to be sort of like the knight at the sort of periphery of it. Or maybe not. I don't know. You can always keep it how it is. Let's say this is going to be a village. And because this village has actually got more people in it. So it can be up to somewhere between 400 and 1,000. It's usually what I constitute as being a village in its own right. So let's say Right, we'll do that. So it's 840 people. It's a pretty sizable village here. So village, population, 840. So that would be a named village, and I'd probably make up some sort of name on it. So like, we'll call it something stupid, like it's something weirdly British. We'll call it like Heath on Hill. There we go. Heath on Hill. That'll be the name, and then I would just take our extra information and be like, hey, this is a village of this size, put in the secret notes, where we don't have to look at it. So Heath on Hill. There we go. Yeah, and I mean that is sort of it. Like, just to make a very basic sort of hub and spoke map to start off, we can probably let's zoom out a little bit so we can see everything on one. There we go. You can see everything kind of together. That'll work. And so that's it. And then sort of we can just, if we wanted to, we could add a little biome over there. We might go, okay, well, we're starting with the hills. Alright, it's just more hills. Okay. So just take that and just drop in another hill around Heathland Hill, as it's named. And so this sort of like highland little area. Then as they explore, you know, they'll figure out the new biomes and the different areas. I might assign biomes to each of these so they know what we're looking at. But otherwise, yeah, I mean, it's very, very easy to sort of like put together a very basic open little sandbox. And what I like to do is I kind of run an in-between sort of plot-driven and player-driven games a lot of times. So, well, I'll drop in like this little sandbox, but there is going to be sort of like an overarching sort of plot, which will have its own little sort of like episodes of adventures in between, and then between that there'll be these opportunities to sort of like check out the Goblin Cave and see what's going on Heath on Hill, and maybe we'll travel down to that temple. Maybe we'll have some reason because of the main adventure. It'll be like, oh, you find this religious artifact and you need to get somebody who's a little bit more knowledgeable to the sort of like local interpretation of the religion to give you some insight on it. So maybe you have to travel down to the temple and confer with the priests and priestesses there and figure out what you can figure out about this, and then maybe they don't know anything about it. Maybe you need to take it to that neutral, intelligent ooze. Maybe you find some old maybe wherever you did your adventuring and you found this religious item, maybe it's like in a sarcophagi, maybe with like a mummy, like mummified remains or something like that, and they're like, oh, well, bring me the like canoptic jar with its brain, and you give it to the ooze, and then the ooze can sort of interpret the dead person's memories or something like that and give you insight on the magic item. And then that self right there just spun off into like kind of 2 to 3 different little quests just to kind of identify an item as to what it is. So it's very easy. You can just kind of use like little strings and like a thumbtack board and just kind of like connect different elements together and kind of connect it if you want to have that stronger sort of narrative, plot-driven event sort of campaign as well. And then sort of use things like these small sandboxes and sort of player-driven goal adventures to kind of be the meat and gravy, kind of make the experience a little bit more rich, a little bit more put together. But yeah, that is sort of everything about sort of my personal hex stocking rules and sort of how I do it, and every one of these. So I hope that makes sense. Like I said, each one of these sort of points of interest in the stocking table kind of scales depending on what scale of hex map I'm doing. That is one thing that we can kind of show off. That'll be probably the last thing I show off. So usually when I'm looking at the smallest level, I'm also wanting to keep track of my macro hexes, so basically the next size up, which is 5 hexes across. So let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So boop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right. Boop. Which is actually, I don't remember. It is surprisingly hard to remember how to do this off the top of my head. This is the one hex that's hard to fill out because it's not like all the other hexes are uniform. This one is slightly different. I think this is... It goes like this, right? Yes. Yes, that is correct. Okay, now I remember what I'm doing. Vaguely. Alright, perfect. Let me get this out of here. Doop, doop, doop. That's how that works. Alright. Back. So these just basically cover over... what was I going to say? I just did that wrong, didn't I? Yeah, I sure did. Alright, not on the ball. There we go. That's what I need. There we go, there we go. Now we've got it. Now we're cooking. So this just basically lets me know sort of what the next level up is. So yeah, for this one I would probably swap out these two, because that would make more sense as sort of a... Since it's at the central of the hex, that it might be the center of a higher level hex. Potentially. We'll see. But it's a very easy way for me to sort of keep track, you know, once I remember how to make the stupid hex outline. So obviously there's a little hex here, and then the red one's just to note where there's crossover between multiple hexes. So the edge of this hex actually... So this is a border, and it borders, goes up through here, and then turns and goes this way. So you see it's like a half and half on each of these little red ones. Then you see that, yeah. So it kind of gives you just the basic outlines of them. I can do that. So it's pretty common that I'll sort of outline sort of every hex that's around sort of our starting hex. And of course this knight's castle in this example sort of facilitates as our safe haven as far as hex crawling is. So that's the place we're getting back to. If we can get back to that place, we don't have to worry about getting attacked. We can sell all our stuff. It's where we can do downtime activities. We can do all that sort of stuff here. And I think that's going to be pretty much it. I don't think we can get anything else on it. I think we can get this one. There you go. So just because we built it kind of not right in the middle, so the outlines of the hexes are a little bit off. It gives you an idea of sort of like what it's looking at when I'm running it. And so then move through the space, lets you do that, and then I'd start keeping track of a higher level map, which is the next level up, so that way when they hit level 5, they transition to that map, where it's less about caring about the traveling and exploring of every single mile that you walk, and it's then more a little bit more focused on sort of like your day, like a day of travel is sort of like a unit of adventure rather than an hour of travel. So it's just a slightly different, like as you progress as player characters in my campaign, the scope at which we look at the campaign changes appropriately. So instead of worrying about, you know, being able to walk from one village to the next, well, you're a 6th level adventurer. There's no doubt that you're going to make it from one village to the next. You're following a road. It's not going to be difficult. We don't need to worry about. We don't need to play that out in time. If it's 2 or 3 hours away, you just get there. Either you're not getting attacked by things and you're not coming across things, or the things aren't of threat or interest level enough to sort of draw you away from your purpose while traveling. And then we just have the same POIs, the points of interest, just at a larger scale. So those also scale up. So it kind of tells you the difference between, like, okay, in the beginning we were like, alright, well this is... You go from tiny little hamlets to villages, to cities, to capitals, from poor knights' manor houses and lords' manor houses, to barons, to counts, to dukes and princes and kings, all the way up. And so those things all scale up that way. But that is everything I wanted to talk about. Like I said, this is not going to be a long stream because of I had that power issue right before I started streaming, so I don't want to waste too much time. I know it's a little bit shorter. I usually go for probably about twice as long as this, but I really don't want to push it. We've been having so many issues around here lately with power, internet, and water, basically all utilities. So I don't really want to push my luck too much. So I think that's going to be it for me. Thank you for hanging out with me this time, guys. Of course, we're going to come back, and our plan is to hit it again next week with the solo D&D adventure, the solo RPG adventure. So if you've been checking that out, come back next week, because we got to figure out what's going to happen now that we've learned that Leah is the reason for this confederation of forces. So that's very interesting. We don't understand why this foreign faction has pulled together gnolls and orcs and goblins, all these monsters in a confederation, under their sort of like command or with their sort of monetary backing, and they are looking specifically for our main character. Problem is, we don't know why, but we have some people who are alive that we can interrogate who will hopefully give us some insight into that question. So I'm very excited for our next episode to figure out what's going on, why she's at the center of all this, because this was a brand new reveal for all of us in the last session, so I'm really excited to figure that out a little bit more. If you have any more questions about the hex trolling thing, we have some videos. If not, leave them down in the comments. I will try to get to them. If we see some sort of commonality or common thread through any of those sort of questions or things that people kind of throw in there, if you have ideas of how you do yours throw them in there too. And if there's enough interest around it, there's a buzz around it, maybe I'll make a follow-up video or something to address sort of very specific questions that people have. But again, that's everything for me. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys, and see you guys next time. Alright? Bye.